Have you ever wondered what your consciousness experiences in those first critical moments after your heart stops beating? Most people push this terrifying question away because it forces them to confront the ultimate unknown. But Dr. Raymond Moeller, a renowned consciousness researcher who spent 40 years documenting near-death experiences at the Institute for Consciousness Studies in Switzerland, uncovered something that will forever change how you understand death itself. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow we've saved something extra special for you. What Moeller discovered through his extensive research with over 12,000 documented cases will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about dying. After analyzing testimonies from patients who were clinically dead for extended periods and then returned to life, he revealed that the first 7 days after death aren't what anyone expects. The soul doesn't immediately journey towards some distant realm or face judgment. Something far more complex and unsettling occurs during this crucial transition period. The consciousness doesn't simply vanish or instantly ascend. Instead, according to Moeller's documented findings, the newly departed soul undergoes a specific 7-stage process that most people are completely unprepared for. These stages determine everything about what happens next in the soul's existence, and understanding them could be the difference between peaceful transition and decades of confusion in the afterlife. Dr. Raymond Moeller began his revolutionary research in 1983 at the Institute for Consciousness Studies after a personal experience that shattered his materialist worldview. During a routine cardiac procedure, Moeller himself experienced clinical death for 14 minutes. What he witnessed during those moments defied everything his scientific training had taught him about consciousness and mortality. Upon his recovery, Moeller dedicated his career to understanding what he had experienced. He established the most comprehensive database of near-death testimonies ever compiled, working with hospitals across Europe and North America to document cases where patients returned from clinical death with vivid memories of their experience. But here's what disturbed Moeller most about his findings. The overwhelming majority of people who die are completely unprepared for what actually happens to their consciousness during the first 7 days. Unlike the peaceful, light-filled journeys often depicted in popular culture, Moeller's research revealed that the initial death experience is far more complex and challenging than most religious or spiritual traditions acknowledge. According to Moeller's documented cases, the moment clinical death occurs, the consciousness doesn't immediately separate from the physical body. Instead, there's a transitional period where the soul remains partially anchored to its earthly form, creating a state of confusion and disorientation that can last for hours or even days. This is where Moeller's research becomes truly unsettling. His documented testimonies consistently describe a phenomenon he termed consciousness fragmentation, where the newly departed soul experiences multiple layers of awareness simultaneously. Part of their consciousness observes their physical body and the activities surrounding it, while another part begins to perceive non-physical realms and beings that exist beyond ordinary reality. During this initial stage, which Moeller classified as day 1 through day 3, the soul often doesn't realize it has died. The consciousness continues trying to interact with the physical world, attempting to communicate with loved ones who cannot see or hear them. This creates intense frustration and anxiety for the departed soul, especially when they witness the grief and activities of their survivors. Moeller's research revealed that souls who die suddenly or traumatically often become trapped in this first stage for extended periods, sometimes refusing to accept their death and clinging desperately to their former physical existence. These souls may remain earthbound for months or even years, unable to progress to the next stages of their afterlife journey. But the documented cases show something even more disturbing about this initial period. The emotional state and spiritual preparation of the individual at the moment of death significantly influences how they navigate these first critical days. Souls harboring deep resentments, unresolved conflicts, or intense material attachments often experience what Moeller described as spiritual turbulence during the transition. According to the research, day 4 through day 5 represents a crucial turning point in the soul's journey. This is when most conscious entities begin to understand their situation and encounter what Moeller termed transition guides, beings of light who help newly departed souls navigate the complex process of leaving physical existence behind. However, Moeller's documentation revealed that not all souls readily accept this guidance. Some individuals, particularly those who were deeply skeptical about afterlife existence during their earthly lives, may resist these guides or interpret them as hallucinations or psychological projections. This resistance can significantly complicate their transition process and delay their movement into higher spiritual dimensions. The research showed that during days 4 and 5, souls also begin experiencing what Moeller called life integration sessions. These aren't the dramatic life reviews often described in popular near-death accounts, but rather subtle, ongoing processes where the consciousness begins processing and integrating the experiences, relationships, and lessons from their recently completed incarnation. What makes this particularly challenging, according to Moeller's findings, is that souls often confront aspects of themselves and their earthly behavior that they had avoided or denied during physical life. The expanded awareness that comes with death strips away the psychological defenses and self-deceptions that humans use to maintain comfortable self-images during their lifetime. Souls may suddenly perceive the true impact of their words and actions on others, understand the motivations behind behaviors they had rationalized, and recognize opportunities for love and service that they had missed or ignored. This expanded awareness can create intense emotional responses, including what Moeller described as spiritual remorse, a profound sadness about missed opportunities and harmful choices made during earthly existence. But here's where Moeller's research reveals something that could change how you approach your current life. The souls who navigate these first 5 days most successfully aren't necessarily those who lived perfect lives or followed specific religious practices. Instead, they're individuals who cultivated certain qualities during their earthly existence that served them well during the transition process. According to the documented testimonies, souls who practiced genuine forgiveness during their lifetime, both of others and themselves, experience much smoother transitions. They're able to release attachments to earthly grievances quickly and move forward in their spiritual development without becoming stuck in patterns of resentment or regret. Similarly, souls who develop strong spiritual practices during their physical lives, whether through prayer, meditation, contemplation, or service to others, seem to possess internal compass points that help them navigate the disorienting early stages of death. They're more likely to recognize and accept guidance from transition beings and less likely to resist the natural progression of their afterlife journey. Moeller's research also revealed that souls who lived with awareness of death's inevitability and spent time contemplating their own mortality during earthly life were significantly better prepared for the actual dying process. These individuals often experienced what the documentation described as, quote, graceful transitions. Moving through the first 7, preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Days with minimal confusion or resistance. Now comes the most critical part of Moeller's discoveries. Days 6 and 7 represent the final opportunity for souls to resolve earthbound attachments before moving into what he termed expanded spiritual dimensions. This is where the consciousness faces its ultimate choice about how to proceed in its existence beyond physical death. According to the research, souls who have successfully navigated the first 5 days arrive at day 6 with clearer understanding of their spiritual situation and greater acceptance of their death. They begin experiencing what Moeller described as dimensional expansion, an increasing ability to perceive and interact with non-physical realities that exist beyond the earthly plane. However, the documented cases reveal that this expansion brings both opportunities and challenges. Souls suddenly become aware of multiple spiritual dimensions existing simultaneously, each with different characteristics, inhabitants, and purposes. The consciousness must choose which dimensional level aligns with its current spiritual development and readiness for continued growth. But here's what's truly concerning about Moeller's findings regarding days 6 and 7. The research suggests that souls who haven't adequately prepared spiritually during their earthly lives may find themselves unable to access higher spiritual dimensions. Instead, they become trapped in what Moeller termed intermediate spiritual planes, dimensional levels that mirror earthly existence but lack the opportunities for growth and service that higher realms provide. These intermediate planes, according to the documented testimonies, can become spiritual prisons for souls who remain attached to earthly desires, unresolved emotional patterns, or materialistic thinking. The consciousness may spend decades or even centuries in these dimensions, unable to progress spiritually until they develop the qualities necessary for advancement to higher planes of existence. The research revealed that souls trapped in intermediate planes often experience monotonous, repetitive existences that mirror the unconscious patterns they lived during their earthly incarnation. They may recreate familiar environments and relationships, but without the genuine growth opportunities that physical existence provides. This creates a form of spiritual stagnation that can persist for extended periods. Moeller's documentation showed that some souls in intermediate planes eventually recognize their situation and begin working to develop the spiritual qualities necessary for advancement. They may spend considerable time in what could be described as spiritual rehabilitation, gradually releasing attachments and expanding their capacity for love, service, and spiritual understanding. Other souls, according to the research, become so comfortable in intermediate dimensions that they resist further spiritual development. They create elaborate fantasy worlds that satisfy their earthly desires and preferences, essentially choosing comfortable spiritual mediocrity over the challenges and rewards of higher dimensional existence. But the most disturbing aspect of Moeller's research involves souls who actively resist the dying process throughout all 7 days. These individuals, often driven by intense fear, anger, or attachment to earthly existence, may refuse to accept death even when their transition guides and expanded awareness make their situation clear. According to the documented cases, these resistant souls can become what Moeller termed spiritually displaced beings, consciousness entities who exist in a liminal state between physical and spiritual dimensions. They may spend years attempting to return to physical existence, trying to possess living bodies, or interfering with the lives of their survivors. The research suggests that spiritually displaced beings often create significant difficulties for themselves and others. They may drain energy from living people, cause unexplained disturbances in physical environments, or become trapped in cycles of frustrated attempts to resume their former earthly activities. What makes this particularly tragic, according to Moeller's findings, is that these souls are refusing the natural progression of their spiritual development. Instead of moving forward into expanded dimensions of existence where they could continue growing and serving, they remain trapped in increasingly futile attempts to recreate their former physical lives. However, Moeller's research also revealed that even spiritually displaced beings eventually exhaust their resistance and accept their death. The natural spiritual forces that govern afterlife existence apparently cannot be permanently denied, though souls may delay their proper transition for considerable periods through stubborn refusal to accept their situation. The documentation showed that when resistant souls finally surrender to the dying process, they often experience what Moeller called accelerated spiritual processing. Having spent so much time in denial and resistance, they must rapidly work through stages that other souls navigate more gradually during the normal 7-day transition period. Now, here's what Moeller's research suggests about preparing for your own eventual death experience. The qualities and practices that determine successful navigation of the 7-day transition period aren't mysterious or requiring special religious training. They're spiritual capacities that anyone can develop during their current lifetime. According to the documented findings, regular contemplation of mortality significantly improves transition experiences. Souls who spent time during earthly life honestly considering their own death, the temporary nature of physical existence, and the possibility of consciousness surviving bodily death were much better prepared for actual dying. This doesn't mean dwelling morbidly on death, but rather developing healthy awareness of life's temporary nature and using that awareness to prioritize what truly matters. Souls who lived with death awareness often made different choices about how to spend their time, energy, and attention during earthly existence. The research also revealed that practicing detachment from material possessions and achievements during physical life creates significant advantages during the transition period. Souls who had learned to hold earthly experiences lightly, enjoying them without becoming desperately attached to them, found it much easier to release their physical existence and move forward spiritually. Similarly, developing genuine forgiveness practices during earthly life proved crucial for smooth transitions. Souls who had worked to forgive others, harmful actions and their own mistakes, were able to move through the 7-day period without becoming trapped in patterns of resentment or self-condemnation that could delay their spiritual progress. Moeller's documentation consistently showed that souls who practiced service to others during their earthly lives experienced more graceful death transitions. Individuals who had developed genuine concern for others' welfare and spent time helping, healing, or supporting their fellow beings seemed to possess spiritual qualities that served them well during the afterlife transition. But perhaps most importantly, the research revealed that cultivating love, not just romantic attachment or family bonds, but expanded compassion for all conscious beings, created the strongest foundation for successful navigation of the 7-day death experience. Souls who had worked to see beyond surface appearances and recognize the spiritual nature of all people were able to accept guidance, release attachments, and move forward in their development with much less difficulty. Here's what's particularly significant about Moeller's findings for people currently living. The research suggests that the spiritual preparation you do now directly influences your experience during those crucial first 7 days after death. Every practice of forgiveness, every act of service, every moment of contemplating mortality creates better conditions for your eventual transition. The documented cases revealed that souls often wished they had understood during earthly life how important certain spiritual practices would become during their death experience. Many reported wishing they had spent less time pursuing material achievements and more time developing the inner qualities that actually matter during spiritual transitions. According to Moeller's research, souls frequently experienced regret about opportunities for love, service, and spiritual growth that they had missed or ignored during their earthly existence. They recognized with painful clarity how their fears, pride, or materialistic focus had prevented them from developing qualities that would have served them well during the afterlife transition. But the research also revealed something empowering about spiritual preparation. The consciousness apparently retains awareness of spiritual growth efforts, even if the results aren't immediately obvious during earthly life. Souls who had sincerely worked to develop compassion, forgiveness, and service to others discovered during their death experience that these efforts had created genuine spiritual advancement, even when their earthly personalities remained unconscious of their progress. This suggests that spiritual practice during physical life isn't wasted, even when it doesn't produce dramatic changes in personality or circumstances. The efforts to grow spiritually apparently create invisible spiritual capacities that manifest during the afterlife transition, helping souls navigate the 7-day period more successfully. Moeller's documentation also revealed that souls who had studied spiritual teachings during earthly life, whether through religious traditions, philosophical inquiry, or personal exploration, possessed cognitive frameworks that helped them understand their death experience more quickly. They were able to recognize spiritual realities and guidance that might seem confusing or threatening to souls who had never considered spiritual dimensions of existence. However, the research showed that intellectual spiritual knowledge alone wasn't sufficient for smooth transitions. Souls who had studied spiritual concepts extensively but hadn't practiced applying them in daily life often experienced significant gaps between their theoretical understanding and their ability to actually navigate the spiritual challenges of dying. The most successful transitions, according to Moeller's findings, occurred among souls who had combined spiritual study with practical application, individuals who had both learned about spiritual principles and worked to embody them through their daily choices, relationships, and responses to life's challenges. Now here's what makes Moeller's research particularly urgent for contemporary people. His later documentation suggested that souls incarnating in modern times face unique challenges during the death transition that didn't exist in earlier historical periods. The complex, fast-paced, technologically driven nature of contemporary life apparently creates spiritual complications that can interfere with natural dying processes. According to the research, souls who had lived heavily technology-dependent lives often experience difficulty during the early stages of death because they struggled to function without their familiar electronic devices and digital connections. Their consciousness had become so accustomed to constant external stimulation that the quieter, more subtle spiritual realities of the afterlife seemed overwhelming or incomprehensible. Similarly, souls who had spent their earthly lives consumed by media, entertainment, and constant distraction often found it challenging to develop the inner focus and spiritual sensitivity necessary for navigating the 7-day transition period. Their consciousness lacked the contemplative qualities needed to perceive guidance from transition beings or understand the spiritual significance of their experiences. Moeller's documentation revealed that souls from highly materialistic cultures often experienced extended confusion during days 1 through 3 because their earthly conditioning had convinced them that consciousness couldn't exist without physical brains. These individuals spent considerable time and energy trying to understand how they could be experiencing awareness after their bodies had died. The research suggested that contemporary souls who had never seriously considered spiritual dimensions of existence were particularly vulnerable to becoming trapped in intermediate spiritual planes or resisting the transition process altogether. Their lack of spiritual preparation left them without the internal resources necessary for navigating the complex realities of afterlife existence. But Moeller's findings also revealed that modern souls have access to spiritual knowledge and practices from traditions around the world, creating unprecedented opportunities for spiritual preparation during earthly life. Contemporary individuals can study wisdom teachings, practice meditation techniques, and explore consciousness-expanding methods that were previously available only to dedicated spiritual practitioners. This creates what Moeller termed spiritual potential, the possibility for contemporary souls to achieve levels of spiritual development during single lifetimes that might have required multiple incarnations in earlier historical periods. However, realizing this potential requires conscious choice to prioritize spiritual development over material pursuits and cultural distractions. According to the research, souls who recognize this opportunity and dedicate themselves to serious spiritual practice during their current earthly existence could experience remarkably smooth death transitions and rapid advancement into higher spiritual dimensions. The key is beginning this preparation immediately rather than postponing it until some future time that may never arrive. Here's what Moeller's documentation suggests about recognizing your own spiritual readiness for the death transition. Souls who are developing the qualities necessary for successful navigation of the 7-day period often experience certain indicators during their earthly lives that suggest their growing spiritual maturity. Advanced souls, according to the research, typically develop increasing sensitivity to the spiritual dimensions that exist alongside physical reality. They may begin experiencing intuitive insights, meaningful dreams, healing abilities, or strong impulses to serve others in ways that transcend personal benefit. These experiences often indicate that the consciousness is beginning to access expanded spiritual capacities that will serve them well during the afterlife transition. Another indicator involves changing relationships with material possessions and achievements. Souls approaching spiritual maturity often find themselves naturally losing interest in accumulating wealth, status symbols, or social recognition. Instead, they become increasingly focused on experiences and activities that provide genuine meaning, connection, and service to others. The research revealed that spiritually advancing souls also develop greater emotional equilibrium in response to earthly challenges. Rather than being overwhelmed by difficulties or clinging desperately to temporary pleasures, they begin maintaining inner peace and spiritual perspective even during turbulent circumstances. This emotional stability becomes crucial during the disorienting early stages of the death experience. However, Moeller's documentation included a warning about spiritual pride that's particularly relevant for contemporary seekers. The research revealed that souls who develop genuine spiritual capabilities sometimes become attached to their advancement, creating new forms of ego identification that can actually interfere with their continued development. According to the findings, spiritual pride represents one of the most subtle obstacles to successful death transitions. Souls who begin feeling superior to others because of their spiritual insights or expecting special recognition for their development often create attachments that bind them to intermediate spiritual planes rather than allowing advancement to higher dimensions. The research suggested that truly advancing souls maintain humility about their development, recognizing that spiritual growth is an ongoing process rather than an achievement to be possessed. They understand that genuine spiritual maturity expresses itself through increased service and compassion rather than claims of special status or supernatural abilities. What emerges from Moeller's extensive research is a picture of death as a complex spiritual transition that requires specific preparation rather than simply hoping for the best or relying on last-minute religious practices. The consciousness apparently continues existing after physical death, but its experiences during the crucial first 7 days are significantly influenced by the spiritual qualities and practices developed during earthly life. The most empowering aspect of Moeller's findings is that spiritual preparation is accessible to anyone willing to begin practicing the qualities that serve souls well during the death transition. Forgiveness, compassion, service to others, contemplation of mortality, and gradual detachment from material obsessions create the internal conditions necessary for navigating the 7-day period successfully. But the research also reveals the high stakes involved in spiritual preparation. Souls who approach death without having developed these qualities may face decades or centuries of confused existence in intermediate spiritual dimensions. missing opportunities for continued growth and service that higher spiritual planes provide. The choice, according to Moeller's documented findings, remains entirely with each individual consciousness. Spiritual advancement cannot be forced or inherited. It must be chosen and practiced through daily decisions to prioritize love over fear, service over selfishness, and spiritual growth over material accumulation. What makes this particularly relevant for contemporary people is that spiritual preparation doesn't require abandoning normal earthly responsibilities or joining monastic communities. The qualities that serve souls well during death transitions can be developed through conscious approaches to family relationships, work situations, community involvement, and daily interactions with others. Every moment of choosing patience over anger, forgiveness over resentment, service over selfishness, contributes to the spiritual capacities that will determine your experience during those crucial first 7 days after death. The spiritual foundation you build during earthly life becomes the platform from which your consciousness launches into whatever comes next in your existence beyond physical form. Dr. Raymond Moeller's revolutionary research reveals that death isn't an ending but a complex transition requiring specific spiritual preparation. The 7 days following clinical death represent a crucial period where consciousness must navigate unfamiliar spiritual territories while releasing attachments to former earthly existence. The souls who make this transition successfully aren't those who lived perfect lives, but rather individuals who cultivated genuine love, practiced forgiveness, served others without expectation, and prepared spiritually for the inevitability of death. Their earthly spiritual practice created internal resources that served them well during the challenging but ultimately rewarding process of moving beyond physical existence. The terrifying and empowering truth emerging from Moeller's extensive documentation is that your experience during those first 7 days after death is being determined by the spiritual choices you make each day of your current life. Every decision to choose love over judgment, service over selfishness, spiritual growth over material obsession moves your consciousness closer to the graceful transition that allows advancement into expanded dimensions of existence. Your preparation for death isn't something that can be postponed until some future time. The spiritual qualities that determine your afterlife experience are developed through daily practice, conscious choice, and gradual alignment with the spiritual purposes that transcend temporary earthly concerns. What will you choose today to prepare your soul for its inevitable journey beyond physical form? The documentation suggests the question could determine not just your death experience, but your entire future existence in dimensions beyond anything earthly life has shown you. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.